Moving on to another pressing story, we are monitoring recent comments made by a senior Treasury official claiming Venezuela and Nicaragua, quote, threaten the international financial system. The Treasury Department's Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing, Marshall Billingslea, spoke at the Brookings Institution this week. And before we get into exactly what he said, let's take a look at who funds that think tank. According to the Brookings website, its top donors include the Qatari government, JP Morgan Chase, pro-Israel media investor Haim Saban, the United Arab Emirates, ExxonMobil, and the U.S. Treasury Department. With a donor list like that, the Brookings Institution was the perfect stage for Billingslea to attack two countries which challenge U.S. financial interests. In an address titled Financial Tools for U.S. Policy Toward Nicaragua and Venezuela, Billingslea accused Caracas and Managua of undermining economic markets and more.
As we've seen with Maduro, Ortega, and the First Lady and Vice President Rosario Murillo, will not hesitate to employ ruthless violence against those who dare speak out. These two regimes together have killed hundreds of their citizens for wanting a better country. Such serious human rights abuses and endemic public corruption undermine the foundation of stable, secure, and functioning societies. They devastate individuals. They weaken democratic institutions across the region, and they degrade the overall rule of law. They perpetuate violent conflict, and they undermine economic markets. And they also threaten the integrity of the U.S. and the international financial system.
One problem with Billingsley's account already is that while it's true to say hundreds of people were killed during protests in both countries, what he leaves out is the fact that number includes deaths of government authorities and supporters killed by armed opposition groups. For example, Venezuela Analysis reported in May of 2017 that, quote, the latest killing brings the death toll in 7 weeks of anti-government protests to at least 55, including 8 confirmed deaths at the hands of authorities and 18 people killed by opposition violence. On the subject of Nicaragua, journalist Max Blumenthal reported in July of this year on a study which, quote, demonstrates how partisan local NGOs conflated all deaths that occurred since April, including accidents and the murders of Sandinistas, with killings by government forces. Washington has seized on the bogus death count to drive the case for sanctions and intensify pressure for regime change. Billingslea even admits during his speech that human rights groups and NGOs assist the Treasury's goal of, quote, shedding light on atrocities.
Our efforts to target human rights abusers have been aided by our partners in Congress, the international community, within the U.S. government, particularly state and justice departments, but civil society, human rights activist groups, non-governmental organizations, and think tanks played just as important a role in documenting and shedding light on the atrocities being conducted in these countries.
Finally, Billingslea goes so far as to declare that Venezuela is a threat to the entire region, promising to bring consequences down on the government of President Nicolas Maduro.
Venezuela that is operating on a mass scale. It has precipitated a humanitarian crisis that is now threatening regional stability, threatening to drag down, for instance, our close ally in Colombia. I commend the actions in recent days by the Mexican authorities, the Colombian authorities, and others who are working together with us, the Panamanian authorities, working together with us to make clear to the Maduro regime there will be consequences for their actions.
With Venezuela and Nicaragua in question, we're joined now by Gloria La Riva. She's an organizer with the Anti-War Answer Coalition. Gloria, why do you believe the U.S. Treasury Department would claim Nicaragua and Venezuela are threats to the international financial system?
I believe that Marshall Billingslea's recent comments and pronouncements are an ominous threat and preparation. They're preparing the groundwork for possible military action against Venezuela, because despite the devastating effects of the U.S. and European Union sanctions against Venezuela, the country is surviving. However, the real human rights violation is the U.S. blocking Venezuela's payments for the import of vital life-saving medicines, such as the insulin that was blocked by the United States, even though Venezuela paid for insulin for 60,000 insulin-dependent patients. Without insulin, you die. And so the U.S. is trying to create the justification for military action, whether directly or with its allies in Colombia and other regional partners of the United States.
And we'll get more into that question in a moment. It should be noted as well, the U.S. then turns around and says this lack of medicine and supplies in Venezuela is a reflection of the failure of the government's policies rather than an outcome of U.S. sanctions. What do Billingsley's comments regarding think tanks and NGOs in countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua tell us about the role these organizations play in supporting U.S. goals for regime change?
Well, let's talk about the Brookings Institute. As you said, ExxonMobil and JP Chase are two of the financiers, including Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. These entities are hungry. They want to grab the oil of Venezuela, which is still, people should know, the largest oil reserves in the world by far. And that oil income is being used for the people, for housing. Almost 3 million homes will be built by the end of next year. Healthcare, education, universities being built. And the banks and the U.S. corporations want that for their profits, as well as the Pentagon, which is anxious, itching for a war in Latin America. And I think also we must also point out the threats against Nicaragua, although the violence that was visited on the country by terrorism, U.S.-sponsored terrorism, has been allayed for now.
Billingslea says Venezuela is a threat to regional stability. As you know, its neighbor Colombia recently joined NATO. What's more, right-wing presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro was elected this week in Brazil, and experts speaking to Russia's TASS news agency actually said they could not rule out the possibility of a Brazilian military invasion of Venezuela taking place under Bolsonaro. Are you concerned that remarks like ones just made by Billingslea could be used to justify such action?
It's very, very serious because Bolsonaro is an open fascist. His victory, he comes from the military. He wants a military dictatorship. It's a danger to the Brazilian people, but also bordering Venezuela, it is definitely a threat. The Brazilian government previously had said that the government right before Bolsonaro had said that they would engage in military action against Venezuela if the need arose. So the U.S. also just completed military operations, war games, so-called, with a number of the regional countries, including Ecuador under the new right-wing president, Lenin Moreno, Colombia, and Brazil.
We're unfortunately out of time, though I would love to talk about this more in the future. Gloria La Riva, organizer with the Anti-War Answer Coalition, and none of this is going away, so we will talk about it again soon.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.